So welcome. I cannot tell you how glad I am to be back. For those who are new to One World or new to our gatherings, I'm Reverend Melanie Eyre. I'm the spiritual director here, and I've been out for about 3 weeks with my son, Nick, who had spinal surgery at Grady Hospital back on July 30th. He went into the hospital on July 21st, and we came home a week ago Thursday on August 6th. It has been an amazing journey that I'm still unpacking and learning from, but I wanted to share some thoughts on it with you today. My first thought is deep gratitude for a surgery that went better than anybody expected. It went so well, and a recovery that is well underway. For any of us who were worried, Nick's personality survived the surgery intact, and he is the same shining light that he has always been. He inspires us every day. He is just a joy. And as I told him throughout this journey, I could not imagine a better traveler to go through it with. I also want to say thank you so much to everybody at One World who continued on while I was at Grady. That's Reverend Linda Went, Reverend Chris Kell, our amazing music director, Asha Lightbearer, and everybody who just jumped in and made sure that our services every week were wonderful, that our community remained connected and engaged, and that our online programs not only continued, but expanded. Because what happened while I was gone, we started our Thursday evening conversations on equity and justice with facilitator Danielle Wright. I am so grateful to all of you for all you have done. You have truly demonstrated the meaning and the power of community. And I just can't thank you enough for everything you did while I was out. I also wanted to thank everybody for all your prayers and your love and your support sent through these 3 weeks to Nick as he was in Grady, and to me. They made such a huge difference. We've gotten cards. One of the things that is a result of this surgery is that his neck is more fused than it was, and so he really can't turn his head all that much. So what we've done is we've posted all the cards on his wall where he can see them, and he loves that. He just loves whenever a new card comes in, he reads it. He's had me make some videos of him saying thank you to people by video, which I then send for the various cards that he gets. I'm so grateful for the food that is coming, for the calls and the texts, and everything that everybody did just to enfold us in the love of this community during this time. I cannot tell you what a difference it made and how grateful we both are. Nick is so funny. He just loves to call people or text them, or I text them, but call them when he gets a card, or just do something to show his appreciation. We are so grateful for everything that you've done. So I also have to say, and this is a bit ironic, but I also have to say that this talk, my subject today, fits in so well with our theme for August, which is examination and exploration of our spiritual toolkits. We get to build our toolkits and use them when things are going well, because we so heavily rely on them when things go south. I cannot remember being in a circumstance where the use of my spiritual practices made such a difference as it did in these last 3 weeks. And that's what I want to talk to you about a bit today. I'd like to share some of my reflections on what I'm calling our Grady journey. It began with a visit to Northside Hospital ER on July 21st, and it ended with an ambulance ride home with Nick on August 6th, when we went back from Grady back home to start his recovery and continue his rehab. It has really been a journey unlike any other for me. So the reason I want to talk about it is not just to update you on my own personal journey, even though I would certainly do that, but also because I know that while not everybody faces the situation that Nick did or our family did, we all face something at some point, due to life events, due to illness, due to the need for surgery, due to something. We all face something that just seems like a looming darkness that rolls in and threatens to overwhelm us. When that happens, we all face the choice of whether we let ourselves be overwhelmed or we somehow figure out, we just dig down and figure out how to hold up our own candle and hold on to hope and faith and the conviction that this darkness will pass. So let me give you some context to the journey that Nick and I went on and our family went on. Many watching today know Nick, who was born with Down syndrome. He's now 29 years old. 15 years, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of spinal stuff because A, I don't know it, and it's not helpful. But 15 years ago, he had a cervical fusion in his upper cervical spine. And my wife and I learned from the doctors at Grady during this past evolution that when a patient has this fusion, it can impose additional strain on vertebrae down the line, and that's what happened with Nick. In addition, for reasons really unknown to the doctors, he at some point developed an infection in his spine, which eliminated one of the discs between C7 and T1. The doctors told us that patients with Down syndrome are sometimes particularly susceptible to degenerative spine issues, which is what happened. For some people with Downs, they find that their bodies age in an accelerated way. And so that is really what happened with Nick, and that led to this degenerative spine condition. In any event, he started to develop muscle weakness, and he gradually began to lose the ability to walk independently and then really to walk at all. His neurologist told us to take him to Northside for an MRI, which we did. And so he and I went down there on July 21st, not knowing that it would be the beginning of a journey that wouldn't see him home for over 2 weeks. So at Northside, the MRI revealed that he had 2 compression fractures in his upper spine. And we also learned from the neurosurgeon there that the complexity of the required surgery was beyond their capacity. This is not something you want to hear at 2 in the morning, but that's what he said. And that Nick needed to go to Grady, which is Atlanta's premier trauma hospital. The good news was that we have Grady and that we have the capacity to care for injuries like Nick's. So this was the point when I began to realize, and we began to realize, that what is coming next was entirely out of our control. So at 3 in the morning of July 22nd, Nick and I rode down in an ambulance to the Grady Marcus Trauma Center, another gift to this city. What an amazing facility. We get there at 2:30, 3 in the morning, and immediately an entire trauma team just swarms over him. Doctors and nurses and techs and people. It was an amazing response, and I was so grateful that we have this capacity to care for people who are injured. There's more on Grady later, but I do not have enough words to express the amazing and the excellent job they did for Nick. This experience, just being there, also brought home for me what is happening for so many others here at home and elsewhere because of the COVID pandemic, or simply because of the injuries people sustain, whether they are accidents or as a result of the violence and the deliberate injury that so often we inflict on each other. Being in that place, in that trauma center, it so starkly brought home for me the fear that these patients must feel, who find themselves suddenly in extremis, not knowing what is next, in unfamiliar surroundings, with life hanging in the balance and no time to even assimilate what is going on. Nick and I were lucky because I was permitted to stay with him. But these days, how many people go through this alone? My heart, I gotta tell you, my heart just breaks when I think about these people and their families and the communities of which they are a part. And I am so glad that we at One World continue to hold all those affected by the pandemic and all beings everywhere in prayer as we send light and energy for their renewal and their healing and their restoration. Being there made it so stark for me as I listened and as I watched and as I just experienced the amazing efforts that the Grady team made for Nick and for everyone else in that trauma center. So over the ensuing days, the next couple days, we were told that Nick was going to need a particularly complex and difficult surgery to repair his compression fractures and to fuse more of his spine to relieve the pressure on his spinal cord, because it was that pressure that was making him weak and that was causing his loss of function. So he wouldn't be home for 16 days. As I said, Grady has a no visitor policy due to COVID, but because of Nick's Down syndrome, they let me stay, which was an absolute godsend. I am so grateful to them for that. So I spent 12 nights there, 4 at home, and every day at the hospital. The first two, I got to tell you, the first few days, and maybe you've been in situations this stark, but the first day or two were just unreal. I mean, Nick found himself in a cervical collar, unable to move his head or his neck, wondering at every moment why he couldn't go home. I went from leaving home on July 21st just to take him down to the ER to spending the night at Grady on the floor next to his bed wrapped in a blanket, wondering if this was really happening and how we get through it. And I don't say that to get sympathy. Oh, she spent the night on the floor in a blanket. It's like, who cares? But to illustrate what an absolute gut punch it was, what a rapid and complete and unsettling change it was, development it was, especially as I knew there was no way around it. There was no way around it. The only way was through it. And I had to ask myself, how do I do that? I knew intellectually, because we teach it here, that I had every choice on how to navigate this experience, but I knew right then that I had to develop or find the internal foundation to do it. So it's really difficult to articulate how dark some of those moments were. I felt displaced from my own experience, as if my life wasn't really happening. And like any parent would in that situation, you ask yourself these questions. What if he's paralyzed? What if he's on a feeding tube? What if he can't eat? What if he dies? These are all possibilities that the doctors gave us, because they were all possibilities. Those of you who know Nick know what his inability to eat would be like. My wife, Deborah, who loves to cook and loves to cook for Nick, said that if he was on a feeding tube, she just wouldn't be able to cook again if Nick couldn't eat. There were so many what ifs. There were so many doubts and so many fears that just crystallized around this situation, and that crystallized so fast. So as I moved forward in this experience, I realized that my only passage through it was to go back to basics, to go back to my practices. Even in the midst of the darkness and the panic, I knew that that was my only lifeline out. So I've shared before that I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and that my daily practice, or one of them, includes reading the daily office. These are readings from the Hebrew Scriptures, what Christians call the Old Testament. That's the Psalm, including the Psalms and the wisdom teachings, and then readings from the New Testament, including the Gospels. It was this ritual that helped, and I did it even though I wasn't sure, or I couldn't see clearly that it would. I did it anyway, which is the value of our practices. What I found out was that when I went back to them, is that sometimes the universe sustains you even when you are not sure that it will. Sometimes, what I found was sometimes I just put one foot in front of the other because I do, and I found a way through by relying on these spiritual practices. All I had to do was take that step, open that book, and open myself to the wisdom that was there that would speak to me. When I opened the daily office for July 24th, the second or third day we were there, the reading was Psalm 40. And I got to tell you, it was like a message direct from Spirit. This is what I read. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the desolate pit, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. Imagine that. I'm sitting in Grady, surrounded by fear and uncertainty, and I read that. I cannot tell you what a difference that made. It was a message that I would be lifted up and that I would find a place to stand, hence the name of this talk, finding a place to stand. When your foundation is kicked out, when you lose your footing, the first rescue you need is just that. You need a place to stand. And so what did this teaching tell me? If I would wait and listen and be available to the presence of Spirit, even in such tough times, I would be lifted up. I would be given courage. I would be given firm footing and a place to stand on and the strength to keep on. This universal love, this all-sustaining heart of the world would lead me to that place to stand, from which I could go forward. The message was continued on July 27th. That day, the reading was Psalm 61, and this is what I read. Hear my cry, O God, listen to my prayer. From the end of the earth, I call to you when my heart is faint, and it was. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I, for you are my refuge, a strong tower against the enemy. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. What was that message? That Spirit will lead me to that rock. That Spirit will lead me to that place to stand that is higher than I am right now. And I realized that this is really the everyday journey that we need to take. This universal love will lead us to a rock that is higher than we are at that moment. And that's all it needs to be. That love remains and sustains us even in the midst of fear and doubt. Every step, every day, Spirit will just bring us up to a place a little higher than we were before. And by taking those steps day by day, rock by rock, we can climb out. I cannot tell you how much that wisdom spoke to me. It was like I didn't need a miracle. I didn't need all of a sudden to be whisked out of Grady. I didn't need anything other than every day a place to stand a little higher than I was the day before. I've spoken before about the wisdom of author Anne Lamotte, who I like a lot. She has written of the development of her spiritual path, which is not linear, it's not predictable, but it's imagery that I love. This is what she writes. My coming to faith did not start with a leap, but rather a series of staggers from what seemed like one safe place to another. Like lily pads, round and green, these places summoned and then held me up while I grew. Each prepared me for the next leaf on which I would land. And in this way, I moved across the swamp of doubt and fear. I loved her imagery. That's just how I felt. Each step you leap, for her, it was from one lily pad to the next. For me, the imagery was from one rock to the next as we move across the swamp of doubt and fear. Through all the uncertainty, all the tests, all the doctors coming in with their litany of possible disastrous results, every day I held on to that image that God would lead me, would lead us to a firm place to stand. Every day a little higher than the day before. Another scripture I turn to every day was one I love and I've spoken about a lot in the past, which is the Bhagavad Gita. While the Christian scriptures that I've just talked about gave me that outlet to seek help, what we've called before that second face of God, that relational face of God. Please be with me, I need help. The Gita reminded me of the third face. It reinforced for me the third face, that God is everywhere. God is all things. We are surrounded by God at all moments. Through its beautiful poetry, the Gita reminded me that Spirit pervades all things, and there is no place we can go where Brahman is not present in the essence of every experience, every moment, every person. As the Lord Krishna says in the Gita to the hero Arjuna, there is nothing that exists separate from me. I am the taste of pure water and the radiance of sun and moon. I am the sacred word and the sound heard in air and the courage of human beings. I am the sweet fragrance in the earth and the radiance of fire. I am the life in every creature and the striving of every spiritual aspirant. How could I not be lifted up when I read that beautiful imagery by the reminder of what God is, by the reminder of what Brahman is? Whatever I was going through, whatever we were going through, we were surrounded and embraced and included in the presence of the divine always. The Gita also reminded me of the power and the necessity of surrender and release. The Lord Krishna teaches, whatever you do, make it an offering to me. The food you eat, the sacrifices you make, the help you give, even your suffering. In this way, you will be freed from the bondage of karma and from its results, both pleasant and painful. Then, firm in renunciation and yoga, with your heart free, you will come to me. So what did this tell me as I was reading it, as I sat in the hospital? First, it told me that whatever I did, I needed to make it an offering to the divine. I needed to do it with my eye on the divine. I could not survive this challenge by railing against it, by attempting to control or change it. My job was to play my part with devotion and humility in caring for Nick, in maintaining a good humor, in serving, as the Christian scripture puts it, with a glad heart, which is not always so easy, and in doing all I could to maintain that ongoing conversation and connection to spirit. That was it. And if I did that, we would come through, even though I didn't know what the result would look like. It was, for me, the only way to approach that horizon over which I could not see. A step at a time, doing really what was mine to do, and keeping that connection, that heart connection to spirit. Of course, the journey was made so much easier because my fellow traveler was Nick. Even though he had his moments of fear, his not understanding what was happening, and his desire to go home, he was so positive. I mean, those of you who know Nick will not find this hard to believe. He was so positive, even in that circumstance. He celebrated every doctor, every nurse, every tech who came in. I love your name. I love your picture. He told everybody, the best doctor ever. People stopped saying, I'm not a doctor. They just said thanks. Everybody who came in was the best doctor ever. He was such pure light. I mean, how could I not be illuminated by that? Even in the middle of a situation that was so difficult and so different. He was such an example and an inspiration to me. I also realized the extent to which he is really not his physical body. He couldn't walk, he couldn't feed himself, he couldn't get out of bed, but he was still the same shining light that he is, and he always has been. It just shocks me that he is called disabled. He is so multi-abled. He is so luminous. Really, in so many ways, it was just his spirit that carried me through. I also got to say, I was so uplifted and sustained by the skill and the devotion and the compassion that we experienced every day at Grady Hospital. I hadn't had an experience at Grady before this, but I cannot tell you what a wonderful place it was for us. I cannot say enough good things about all the absolute heroes who worked there. in the midst of this pandemic that I know scares them to death, they come to work every day and they care for the most vulnerable, the most injured, the most in need. Even though their jobs are so stressful, every single one of them took time to connect with Nick, to comfort him and smile at him or play with him and just make his stay a little easier. I remember one day he used to watch his iPad. And one way I could tell he was getting better is he could reach up and punch the buttons on the iPad. But anyway, he was watching his iPad and a tech came in and she stopped for a minute and she said, "That sounds like Goosebumps." It was. And so they connected over the fact that they each loved Goosebumps. It was just little things like that that they took time to do. They shared their humanity with him and they saw his, and it made such a huge difference. So this is where we've been, and these are my thoughts so far. I'm kind of like Charles Fillmore. I reserve the right to change my mind, but I reserve the right to expand my understanding from this experience, because as I continue to harvest it, more and more is going to strike me, and I look forward to sharing it with you over the coming weeks. I'm so grateful for his recovery. The surgery went better than anyone expected. They put him into ICU right after the surgery, and I went home because I figured he was going to be out. Everyone said go home, but he was waking up sooner. He was moving sooner. He was speaking. He was able to eat. He was just amazing. Every day his function improves. Today, God help us, he told me that he wants a bell in his room. I said, "Nick, what are you going to do with a bell?" He went, "Ding dong." So he gets to summon us with a bell. I'm not sure I have the spiritual toolkit for that, but I will have to see what I can come up with. So that is where we've been. And I got to tell you, I am also so grateful to the One World community for the support and the love that you have given us and that you continue to give us in holding us up through such a difficult time. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in learning more about One World, please visit our website at www.oneworldspiritualcenter.net. There you will see information about our beliefs and our programs and our outreach, and you will also find ways to contact us for any additional information. If you'd like to see the entire service from which this talk was taken, please go to the Videos and Blogs tab on our website, and under Past Services, you can find the full service for this date, which was August 16th, 2020. Thank you so much for your interest in One World.